Have you ever noticed that the things you naturally do when nobody is watching can reveal more about the way your mind works than any test ever could? You may think you're simply enjoying your own company, but some solitary habits are linked to deep thinking, intellectual curiosity, and unusually strong cognitive independence. And the strange part is, you may already be doing them without realizing what they reveal about your mind. Stay with me until the end, because we're going to uncover 5 things people often do alone that can be associated with exceptionally strong cognitive abilities. From how you solve problems and question ideas, to how you use silence, curiosity, and independent thinking. This isn't about giving yourself an IQ label from a few habits. Psychology is far more complicated than that. Instead, this video will help you recognize patterns in the way you think and understand why certain minds naturally seek solitude when they want to learn, create, analyze, or solve problems. And this matters because intelligence isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like sitting alone and thinking about a question nobody else cares about. Sometimes it looks like questioning something everyone else accepts. And sometimes the strongest sign isn't what you know, it's how deeply you're willing to think when nobody is there to tell you what to think. 5 habits can make a sharp mind look strange, but seeing yourself in all 5 doesn't prove you have an extreme IQ. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is what you do when your mind catches something your ego would rather ignore. Here's the first useful distinction. A strong mind doesn't just produce more thoughts. It stays engaged when thinking becomes uncomfortable, uncertain, or personally inconvenient. So the question isn't whether you look intelligent. It's whether your private habits keep pulling you toward complexity when nobody's watching. The 5th habit reveals that better than the other 4, because noticing a pattern is easy. Trying to prove your own pattern wrong isn't. You've probably had moments when your mind made ordinary life harder than it needed to be. A casual question followed you home. An empty evening felt better than another plan. A harmless conversation kept reopening after midnight. Those experiences can look unrelated. They're not. Each one asks your mind to remain active without an external reward. There's no deadline. Nobody's paying you. You're not getting applause for sitting in bed and wondering why one sentence from a meeting felt slightly off. That matters because intelligence tests measure certain abilities under controlled conditions. These habits reveal something different. What your mind chooses to do when no test has been placed in front of it. That difference is easy to miss. Someone can score well on an abstract reasoning test and hate thinking outside the test. Someone else can have an unusually active inner life but never appear impressive in a meeting because quick speech and deep thought aren't the same skill. A habit can't diagnose your IQ. It can, however, reveal the kind of mental effort you repeatedly tolerate. That's the scorecard here. Not whether you can attach a flattering label to yourself, but whether these 5 music patterns describe what your mind actually does. The first is common enough to overlook. The 5th is rare enough that people often imitate its surface while avoiding its real cost. Number 1. You fall into questions nobody assigned you. You know the moment. You're supposed to be checking one detail before bed. 20 minutes later, you've got 6 tabs open because the original answer created a better question. Maybe you wanted to know why rent rose so quickly in one part of your city. Now you're reading about housing supply, interest rates, planning rules, and population shifts. Nobody asked for a report. You're not even planning to move. You just couldn't leave the gap open. The mechanism behind this is often called epistemic curiosity. It's the drive to close a gap between what you know and what you want to understand. But there are 2 versions of that gap. One feels broad and light. You enjoy encountering new ideas, so you wander. The other feels precise and irritating. One missing piece catches in your mind, and you can't settle until you find it. Researchers sometimes call these interest type and deprivation type curiosity. One pulls you toward discovery. The other pushes you away from not knowing. You may have both. That's why the question can feel more urgent than the work you were meant to finish. The work has an external deadline, but the question has created internal tension. You're not collecting facts at random. Your mind has detected an incomplete model. The incomplete model is what bothers you. That doesn't automatically mean the subject is important. You can spend 40 minutes learning how lifts decide which floor to answer first and gain nothing you'll use tomorrow. But usefulness isn't the immediate reward. Coherence is. In 1982, John Cacioppo and Richard Petty introduced the idea of need for cognition. It describes a person's tendency to engage in and enjoy effortful thought. That wording matters. It isn't the ability to think. It's the tendency to choose thinking when easier mental options are available. Imagine two people seeing the same claim in a group chat. One registers whether the claim agrees with them and keeps scrolling. The other notices that the numbers don't quite fit the conclusion, searches for the original source, and loses part of the evening checking it. The second person may not be trying to win anything. The mismatch has become difficult to ignore. That's recognition number one. You don't just like answers. You become attached to the process of making an answer hold together. There's a cost to this. Your attention can be captured by questions that don't deserve it. A mind that enjoys effort doesn't always allocate that effort well. So, the useful test isn't whether you research obscure subjects. Plenty of passive content consumption can feel like research. The test is what you do with friction. When an explanation becomes technical, do you keep going long enough to understand it? When two sources conflict, do you compare them? When a satisfying claim turns out to rest on weak evidence, can you let the satisfaction go? That's intellectual investment. You give the question enough effort to risk losing the answer you wanted. A research team led by Sophie von Stoom examined intellectual curiosity alongside cognitive ability and effort in relation to academic performance. Their work suggested that curiosity contributes something meaningful beyond raw cognitive ability. That doesn't turn curiosity into an IQ test. It shows why an active mind can outperform its initial advantages over time. Ability affects what you can process now. Curiosity affects how often you return to difficult material, which means it can change what you're capable of processing later. It compounds. You've seen the opposite as well. Someone is quick, articulate, and effortlessly good at first impressions. But the moment a subject requires sustained attention, the interest disappears. Quickness can hide shallowness for a while. Your habit works in the other direction. You may look distracted because your attention has left the surface conversation, but internally you're testing the structure underneath it. That can make small talk tiring. The conversation gives you social contact, but not enough cognitive grip. So, you ask the question that slightly changes the temperature. You want to know why someone changed careers, not what their new job title is. You want the reason behind the move, the hesitation before the answer, and the part they nearly didn't say. Sometimes that creates a real conversation. Sometimes the other person looks at you as though you've asked for their medical records. You learn to hold back. That restraint can make you appear quiet, but the quiet isn't empty. It's often crowded with questions you've decided not to ask. Here's the distinction that keeps this habit honest. Curiosity is not intelligence wearing casual clothes. It's a motivational pattern that gives cognitive ability more opportunities to operate. It means your mind doesn't always wait for permission before working. If number one described you, subscribe. But that's not the one that's going to bother you. Number two, you choose solitude without feeling deprived by it. You get through a full day in an open plan office or 6 hours of remote meetings and someone asks whether you want to go out. Nothing happened. Nobody upset you. You still say no. You make dinner. You put your phone face down. The flat becomes quiet. And instead of feeling as though something is missing, you feel your attention returning to you. That reaction gets misunderstood because being alone can come from several different places. It can be a preference for lower stimulation. It can be a need for autonomy. It can be avoidance. It can also be a situation you didn't choose. Those experiences may look identical from outside. Internally, they're completely different. The key question is simple. Does the quiet restore your capacity to reconnect, or does it make reconnection feel increasingly dangerous? If it restores you, solitude is functioning as regulation. Your mind has spent the day processing voices, facial expressions, interruptions, decisions, background noise, and the low-level demand to remain socially available. Once those demands stop, cognitive resources become available again. That's why you may suddenly want to read, build something, work through an idea, or sit without input. You weren't waiting to escape life. You were waiting to regain control over where your attention went. Psychologists studying self-determined solitude have found an important distinction between choosing time alone and experiencing it as imposed. Choice changes the emotional meaning of the same physical situation. A closed door can feel like confinement when you want connection. The same door can feel like relief when you chose the quiet. Autonomy is doing much of the work. This is why a free evening can feel better than a social plan you were genuinely looking forward to. The plan may be enjoyable, but it still requires coordination. You have to leave at a certain music time. You have to track the conversation. You have to decide when to go home without making the exit feel abrupt. None of that is tragic. It just has a cost. You know exactly what I'm describing. You've sat in your car after arriving home, not because you wanted to stay in the car, but because nobody could ask anything from you there. That pause wasn't social failure. It was an attention boundary. Research on introversion and social stimulation helps explain part of this, but introversion isn't the entire answer. Some people who are socially confident still require large periods of unstructured solitude. They can lead a meeting, go on dates, maintain friendships, and speak comfortably to strangers. They just don't need constant contact to feel internally occupied. Their attention generates its own material. That's the flattering interpretation, and sometimes it's accurate. But it needs a check. Chosen solitude remains chosen only if you can leave it. If you can reconnect when you want to tolerate the ordinary risk of being known, and enjoy the right company without resenting its presence, the solitude is probably serving autonomy. If every invitation produces dread, every delayed reply becomes a reason to disappear, and every imperfect interaction confirms that staying away is safer, something else may be operating. That doesn't mean you need fixing. It means the same behavior can protect two very different needs. One is the need for mental space. The other is the need to avoid anticipated threat. The internal test isn't do I spend a lot of time alone. It's what becomes possible when I'm alone. Do you become more curious, more settled, more able to return to people without feeling invaded? Or do you spend the whole evening replaying what might go wrong when you eventually return? The first pattern is restorative solitude. The second can be avoidance wearing the same clothes. This distinction matters because people often shame the restorative version and romanticize the avoidant one. They tell the person who needs quiet to get out more while praising total withdrawal as independence. Both responses miss the mechanism. Healthy solitude doesn't prove you're above other people. It proves that external stimulation isn't your only available source of engagement. That can be an advantage. It means boredom arrives later. It means you can work without constant feedback. It means a blank weekend doesn't automatically feel like a social emergency. But there's another cost. When you're good at being alone, people may underestimate how much deliberate effort connection requires from you. A friend sends 3 messages. You read them, intend to answer properly, and postpone the response because a proper answer needs more attention than you have. 2 days pass from your side. The relationship hasn't changed. From theirs, the silence has become information. This is where autonomy can create accidental distance. You experience time apart as neutral while someone else experiences it as a change in closeness. Neither interpretation is dishonest. So the rare part isn't enjoying solitude. It's knowing the difference between restoration and disappearance and noticing when your preference begins charging someone else a price you didn't intend. That awareness lets you remain private without becoming unreadable. You don't have to perform constant availability. You do have to recognize that other people can't see the intact relationship inside your head. There's a sentence worth holding here. I'm alone because I choose quiet is not the same as I'm alone because connection feels unsafe. From outside, nobody can reliably tell which one is true. Sometimes you can't either. The answer shows up after the quiet has done its work. If you feel more capable of contact, you are restoring yourself. If every hour away makes return feel harder, the quiet may be protecting fear rather than attention. No label settles that for you. Your pattern does, and that was the common one. Number 3, you replay conversations after everyone leaves. The meeting ended hours ago. You're brushing your teeth and one exchange comes back with better sound than it had in the room. Your manager said the deadline was ambitious. Someone looked away. You gave a short answer because everyone else was waiting. Now your mind is reconstructing the scene. You remember the pause before the word. You consider whether the comment was about the schedule or about you. You draft the answer you could have given, then another answer that would have sounded less defensive. This process has a name: post-event processing. It's especially well documented in social anxiety research, where people review an interaction after it ends and focus on perceived mistakes, signs of rejection, or evidence that they performed badly. That finding matters because conversation replay is often mislabeled as proof of unusual intelligence. It isn't. A highly active mind may produce more interpretations, but more interpretations don't guarantee more accuracy. Sometimes they create more ways to make the same fear sound reasonable. So what separates useful social monitoring from rumination? Evidence. Useful reflection searches the memory for information that could change your next decision. Rumination repeats the emotional charge while treating uncertain details as settled facts. One asks, "What actually happened?" The other asks, "How bad was I?" That's the fork. Suppose you made a joke on a date and the other person became quieter. Useful reflection considers several explanations. The joke may have missed. They may have been tired. The conversation may have moved on to a subject they didn't enjoy. You check what happened afterward. Did they keep asking questions? Did they suggest meeting again? Did the tone recover? Rumination ignores that broader record. It returns to the quiet moment because the quiet moment can support the feared conclusion. A recent systematic review and meta-analysis found a meaningful relationship between post-event processing and social anxiety. The replay wasn't evidence of superior social perception. It was often part of a threat maintenance cycle. The mind reviews an ambiguous event, selects negative details, feels more certain that the event went badly, and enters the next interaction expecting danger. That expectation changes behavior. You speak less. You monitor yourself more. You miss parts of the conversation because some of your attention is watching your own face from an imagined third-person view. Then the interaction feels less natural, which gives the replay fresh material. That's not insight. It's a closed loop. But the mechanism can be used differently. Social monitoring becomes constructive when you separate observation from interpretation. Observation. They answered more briefly after I interrupted. Interpretation. They decided, I'm unbearable. The observation may be useful. The interpretation requires evidence you don't yet have. That gap is where calibration lives. You don't need to suppress the replay. You need to stop granting every thought the status of a witness. Memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction. And each replay can be altered by your current mood, your expectations, and the conclusion you're trying to test. That's why the perfect response you invent at midnight feels so obvious. You're solving the conversation with information that wasn't available when you were inside it. The room has stopped moving. Nobody can interrupt. You know what the other person said next. Of course, you're more articulate now. That doesn't mean the earlier version of you failed. It means real-time conversation imposes a heavier processing load than private revision. You track words, tone, timing, facial expression, your own response, and the social consequences of taking too long. A pause that feels in your room can feel uncomfortable across a table. So, you choose speed. Later, depth returns and objects to the compromise. You did this last week. You left a conversation feeling fine, remembered one awkward sentence later, and revised the entire evening around it. That revision felt like discovery. It may have been mood-dependent editing. Here's the practical distinction. If the replay produces one specific update, it has probably completed useful work. Maybe you realize you interrupted twice. You decide to leave more room next time. The thought can stop. If the replay produces only a verdict about your character, it isn't updating a skill, it's prosecuting an identity. That's why I should ask one more question before giving advice is useful. While I always ruin conversations, isn't one changes behavior? The other makes a global claim from selective evidence. An active mind can be particularly vulnerable here because it can generate persuasive explanations quickly. Every alternative line, remembered expression, and imagined judgment adds detail. Detail feels like accuracy. It isn't the same thing. A high-resolution story can still be fiction. The deeper habit isn't replaying what happened. Almost everyone does that after an emotionally uncertain interaction. The deeper habit is catching the moment when review stops seeking information and starts manufacturing certainty. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. A negative answer can feel better than no answer because at least the case appears closed, so your mind may choose they disliked me over. I don't know what that pause meant. The first hurts more, but it ends the search. The second is psychologically harder because it leaves the file open. If you can leave it open, your social perception improves. You stop filling every blank with the explanation that matches your fear. You also become better at checking interpretations against behavior over time. One delayed reply means little. A consistent pattern of cancelled plans means more. One flat comment in a meeting means little. Repeated exclusion from decisions means more. Accuracy lives across patterns, not isolated moments. That's what this habit can imply about you when it's working well. You're willing to review your own behavior, but you're also willing to admit when the available evidence can't support a conclusion. That second willingness is rarer. Comment the number of the first habit that actually described you. If that described you, the next one explains something you've never told anyone. Number 4. You try to disprove your own first answer. You form an opinion quickly. Maybe a colleague is taking credit for your work. Maybe someone you're dating is losing interest. Maybe layoffs are coming and management's language has started sounding careful. Your first interpretation arrives with a full emotional response. But later, you do something that feels almost disloyal to yourself. You look for evidence that your interpretation is wrong. You reread the message without the tone you assigned to it. You ask whether the colleague may have misunderstood who was presenting. You compare management's current language with what they said 6 months earlier. You don't erase your first answer. You make it compete. That habit is closer to actively open-minded thinking than chronic self-doubt. Self-doubt says, my judgment can't be trusted. Open-minded thinking says, my judgment should have to survive alternatives. Those are not the same posture. One weakens the person making the decision. The other strengthens the process used to make it. Metacognitive calibration is part of this. It's the ability to align confidence with the quality of your evidence. When evidence is strong, confidence can rise. When evidence is limited, confidence should remain limited even if your emotional reaction is intense. Most people understand that in theory. The difficult part comes when your identity has joined the argument. Suppose you believe remote work makes your team more productive. You've defended it for months. Then a project stalls because decisions keep disappearing into long message threads. You now have 2 problems. The first is the project. The second is that changing your view may make your earlier certainty look foolish. A calibrated mind separates them. It asks what the new evidence should change, not how to protect the old version of itself. That sounds straightforward. It rarely feels that way. Keith Stanovich, Richard West, and Maggie Toplak reviewed evidence on my side bias, the tendency to evaluate information in ways that favor existing beliefs. Their conclusion was uncomfortable. Cognitive ability offers surprisingly little protection against this bias. A capable reasoner can still be deeply partial. Sometimes capability makes the problem harder to detect because a fast mind can produce better arguments for whatever it already wants to believe. You don't experience yourself avoiding evidence. You experience yourself explaining why the opposing evidence doesn't count. That's the intelligence trap. Reasoning becomes a lawyer. It gathers favorable facts, questions hostile witnesses, and finds technical reasons to exclude inconvenient material. It can do this elegantly. The elegance is what makes the belief feel examined. But a lawyer's job isn't to discover what happened. It's to defend a side. If your reasoning has already accepted that job, more thought may increase confidence without improving accuracy. The uncomfortable possibility is that intelligence can make you a better lawyer for a belief without making you a better judge of it. You can know more, speak more precisely, detect weaknesses in other people's arguments, and still protect your own conclusion from the same level of scrutiny. You may even call that scrutiny. That's why genuine self-disconfirmation feels different from debate. You're not waiting for the other side to fail. You're identifying what evidence would make you change your mind before you know whether that evidence exists. That order matters. If you decide the standard after seeing the evidence, your mind can keep moving the line. You say you'll reconsider if a prediction fails. It fails. You explain that the timing was unusual. You say you'll reconsider if someone's behavior remains consistent. It remains consistent. You explain that the person is unusually persuasive. Every failed test receives an exception. The belief becomes impossible to lose. At that point, it's no longer a conclusion. It's a protected possession. Actively open-minded thinking creates the possibility of loss. You ask, what would I expect to see if I were wrong? If your colleague wasn't taking credit, perhaps they'd readily correct the record when asked. If the person you're dating wasn't losing interest, perhaps their reduced messaging would coexist with clear plans and reliable follow-through. If layoffs weren't imminent, perhaps leadership would provide specific hiring commitments rather than vague reassurance. Now, the belief has contact with the world. You don't need certainty, you need a result that could move you. This habit can look like indecision from outside. You take longer, you qualify your language, you say, that's my current read, instead of treating a first impression as a permanent verdict. Some people interpret that as weakness because certainty is easier to display than calibration. But confidence and competence aren't identical. A person can sound completely sure because they haven't represented the problem fully enough to see its uncertainty. Another person can sound cautious because they can see 3 variables nobody else has included. The caution isn't proof of greater intelligence. It's evidence that the map contains more than one route. There's still a danger. You can turn self-disconfirmation into endless delay. For every decision, you generate another possibility. You keep researching because one more piece of evidence might remove the risk. It won't. Calibration doesn't require total information. It requires confidence that matches the information available, followed by a decision that acknowledges what remains unknown. You can say, I'm about 60% sure this job will be better, and staying also has a cost. That's more useful than waiting for 95% certainty from a choice involving people, markets, and future conditions. The aim isn't to eliminate error. It's to make your beliefs revisable. That implies something important about you. If you can change your mind without experiencing every revision as humiliation, your identity is less dependent on always appearing correct. You become able to use intelligence for inquiry rather than defense, and that was the common one. Number 5. You see patterns, then try to break them. You notice that a project begins slipping before anyone acknowledges it. The meetings get longer, but decisions get less specific. Deadlines remain on the calendar while ownership becomes strangely vague. You feel the structure before you can fully explain it. Or you notice the same type of person appearing in your dating history. Different job, different clothes, different biography, but the same pattern of intense attention followed by unreliable contact. The connection seems obvious once you see it. Pattern detection can be part of fluid reasoning. In abstract tasks such as Raven's progressive matrices, you infer the rule connecting shapes and use it to identify the missing piece. The task strips away ordinary knowledge. You're not rewarded for knowing a fact. You're rewarded for finding a relationship. Relational integration goes further. It involves combining separate relationships into a coherent structure. A change deadline means little alone. A change deadline, vague ownership, reduced hiring, and suddenly careful language from leadership may form a larger pattern. Your mind links the pieces that can be useful, but everyday life isn't a clean reasoning test. The relevant signals aren't labeled, and random events can resemble meaningful structure. That creates the central problem. How do you tell a real pattern from an elegant coincidence? The first answer is prediction. A useful pattern should tell you something about what comes next. If you believe a project is quietly failing, you might predict that the next review will contain more discussion of process and less evidence of completed work. If that doesn't happen, your confidence should move. The second answer is alternative explanations. Maybe the meetings became vague because the project is failing. Or maybe two decision makers are away. The team is waiting for a legal review and nobody wants to speculate. Both explanations fit the current evidence. The rarer habit is not producing the more dramatic story. It's keeping both stories alive until something distinguishes them. The third answer is the base rate. A delayed message on a dating app can mean loss of interest. It can also mean the person became busy, forgot, started seeing someone else, or uses the app irregularly. What happens most often in that setting matters more than how vivid your preferred explanation feels. Base rates are emotionally unsatisfying because they treat your experience as one case among many. Your mind wants the specific reason. Sometimes the honest answer is that the specific reason isn't available. The fourth answer is missing evidence. People usually ask what supports a pattern. They ask less often what should be present but isn't. Suppose you think a friend is slowly cutting contact. You have shorter replies and fewer invitations. But when you initiate a plan, they agree, arrive, stay engaged, and mention being overwhelmed by work. The missing evidence is active avoidance. That doesn't prove the friendship is unchanged, but it weakens the strongest version of your theory. Pattern verification asks you to count absences as well as presences. This is where intuition becomes accountable. You don't have to dismiss the signal you noticed. You ask the signal to survive contact with competing explanations, ordinary frequencies, missing evidence, and future outcomes. If it survives, confidence becomes earned. If it doesn't, you release it. That release is harder than detection because seeing a pattern can feel personally meaningful. It gives disorder a shape. It makes you feel less exposed to surprise. Letting it go returns you to uncertainty. You're doing it right now. Listening to this part of your mind is matching these 5 habits to memories, while another part is deciding whether the match is strong enough to count. That second process is the real 5th habit. Pattern recognition by itself is common. Humans find faces and clouds, intentions and delays, and trends inside very small samples. The brain is built to search for structure because missing a real pattern can be costly. But that system produces false positives. A smoke alarm that never misses a fire will sometimes react to toast. Sensitivity creates noise. Your pattern detector works under the same trade-off. If it's highly responsive, it may notice real structure early, but it will also generate convincing connections that aren't there. So being first to see something isn't enough. You need a method for being first to abandon it when the evidence fails. That's what makes this habit rare. People often enjoy the identity of being perceptive. They like saying they can read a room, detect manipulation, or know when something is about to go wrong. Those claims are difficult to test because remembered hits receive more attention than forgotten misses. You remember the time you knew a relationship would end. You don't remember every evening when a strange tone meant nothing. You remember predicting a workplace problem. You forget the concerns that resolved quietly. This is confirmation bias working with selective memory. The pattern feels accurate because your internal record has preserved its successes better than its failures.